Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism Midweek Show. Nice to be with you as always. Hope you and yours are well. We had hoped today to have Anas Al-Khatiri, the Arabic expert and academic, to discuss with us all that's going on over there in West Asia, as he prefers to call it, not the Middle East. But unfortunately, the dreaded COVID's got him, and other commitments have got our Eva. But not to worry, we've still got lots to talk about and put together a midweek global show here. And we have to particularly thank Finbar Markey, our friend in Ireland, for coming over to help us. Finbar, welcome back, my friend.
Hi guys, it's always a pleasure. You don't have to thank me at all.
But we liked it. And over there in Old Ricky, it's our Lloyd. How you, Lloyd?
How you doing?
Good. Quite a week. I'm doing great, and but it's an awful lot going on and a lot to talk about. Yeah. But before we get started, folks, remember, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps us. And if you haven't already, subscribed so you don't miss a show. For example, we've got another special coming up on Friday, so you don't want to miss that. Hit that subscribe button. But let's get started right away. Maybe Finbar, being our friend from across our Celtic cousin, your thoughts on the power sharing agreement being restored in the north, in the occupied counties?
There's a lot being said about Sinn Féin's Michelle O'Neill, the leader of the Sinn Féin party, becoming the First Minister in the north of Ireland. But the Deputy and First Minister always shared the same levels of power according to the Good Friday Agreement anyway. So it's a symbolic development in itself. It is a big development. It's historical. It's noteworthy. In terms of the change of the situation, I don't see much change. So we had a situation where for a couple of years the powers in Stormont, the devolved government in Stormont was not operating. The DUP and other unionist parties had pulled the plug on it because they said that the border arrangements and the Irish Sea border arrangements, as they saw it, because of Brexit, was basically a dismantling of the union as far as they were concerned. They seem to have conceded on that issue now, with some slight changes where there's been the creation of what's called a red and a green lane. So products that are thought to be destined solely for Northern Ireland will go through one of the lanes and be fast-tracked with less paperwork. And products that could be exported potentially to the EU, those products will go through a slower lane with a lot more paperwork. Ultimately, there hasn't really been that much change there. I think what's really grating on the unionist community in the north of Ireland is the fact that they feel it's every step, every advance, no matter how symbolic or not, made by a non-unionist in the north of Ireland will be seen as a step closer to a united Ireland. So there's even been a spat. As an example, the Northern Irish Secretary, Chris, I have to write his name down because these double-barrel names. Chris Heaton-Harris.
He's probably been replaced.
Chris Heaton-Harris was answering questions in the British Parliament in London the other day, and Jeffrey Donaldson was on the one side, on the unionist side, and the head of the SDLP was on the other side. And the issue was about what consensus means and what the Good Friday Agreement means. And the Good Friday Agreement actually says that the people of the consensus from the people of the island of Ireland, not the north of Ireland, not the Republic, the island of Ireland. So the SDLP representative was just making the point and confirming with Chris Hahan that was the agreement. Chris Hahan agreed with him and said, yeah, that's the Heaton-Harris agreed with him and said, yeah, that's the Good Friday Agreement. Jeffrey Donaldson, leader of the DUP, stood up and he said in his statement that it was about consensus from the people of the north of Ireland. And Chris Heaton-Harris stood up and said, yeah, that's it. Well, which is it? So it would appear that the fundamentals of the Good Friday Agreement are not yet agreed, even though the agreement has been signed and in existence for 20 years or more, far more than 20 years. So we have this agreement. We have one side of it, the unionist side. And remember, the DUP are considered to be the milder of the unionists now these days, because then you have the TUP and other far more radical unionist parties. But they are completely petrified of any inkling that we may be stepping towards agreeing and enacting what it says in the Good Friday Agreement. So there's a perception that what this consensus would mean, it says in the Good Friday Agreement as well, that when it appears that the population of Ireland have shown that they want a referendum on this, then a referendum will be held, an all-Ireland referendum will be held. It doesn't go into detail about how you measure that. Is it polls? Is it, so how do you get this referendum? How do you measure the pulse of the population of the island of Ireland and say, yeah, they're ready now for this? So there have been other discussions happening. This morning, there was something in one of the British morning programs, again, DUP representative, and the same discussion. No, it was actually Chris Heaton-Harris himself that was on the Good Morning program this morning. And he was being pressed on this issue of how do you make that measure? And he said, not in his lifetime. Now, this is the Northern Ireland Secretary, not a representative of the DUP, whereas Michelle O'Neill has indicated that she expects a poll within the next 10 years. Now, either Chris Heaton-Harris has got a diagnosis from his doctor that he's not telling anybody about, and that he understands that it will be within 10 years, but still not within his lifetime, or on the other hand, he's representing the unionist camp. And in doing so, he's ignoring the Good Friday Agreement. Oh. So this is not going to go well. The more indicative the DUP's measurements and statements are with regards to the refusal to accept any kind of a referendum, which is what they're saying is, the more worthless the Good Friday Agreement is, and the more chances we will have to come back to the situation before the Good Friday Agreement. So in terms of any levels of excitement or anything like that, I have none. Another example of the DUP's intransigency and hypocrisy is the fact that over the last 24 hours, Jeffrey Donaldson has said that rather than talking about border polls, Miss O'Neill of Sinn Féin should actually be talking about the nitty-gritty of people's lives in Northern Ireland, the bread and butter kind of stuff. This is the guy and his party that pulled down the entire government and power sharing agreement because they wanted to focus on issues of constitutionality rather than the bread and butter on tables at home. So the hypocrisy stands out there. But ultimately, the Unionists of Northern Ireland will never budge. And their type of democracy is only democracy when it suits them.
Yeah.
When it comes to the point where all of the requirements to have a referendum fall into place in the north of Ireland and on the island of Ireland, they will do everything to stop it.
Yeah.
Not sure what they'll do. And I'll tell you, they'll have the backing of the British intelligence and British secret services. But they will.
Welcome to our world.
Yeah. Now, I do not believe that Sinn Féin is particularly interested in a united Ireland, the leadership of Sinn Féin. I have a personal belief that they were bought out and sometimes bribed and blackmailed possibly in the 1980s. And the leadership of both the paramilitaries and the leadership of the political wing of Sinn Féin. Now, I know people who have been staunch Republicans all their lives and who are now what is termed dissident Republicans. And they told me the inner workings of what happened through that process. So the men who are willing to take action and the women who are willing to take action have not gone away from what I can see. They're waiting. And the situation, and it would play fully into the DUP's hands for violence to return to the north of Ireland. That would be their excuse. To say, no, we have to go back to complete London control. I don't believe Sinn Féin are particularly eager. I believe that they're ultimately controlled by the United States from a financial point of view, Sinn Féin. And historically, right back to 1916 and post-1916 and the Civil War in Ireland, there was the American-funded elements within Sinn Féin and the Irish Republican Army who were completely in the pockets of American Irish capitalists. And so there was a more left-wing element, a very strong working class left-wing element within both the Republican movement in Ireland historically and also within the workers. Remember, James Connolly and the workers went out in 1916 too and participated in the Rising. Well, they were all dismantled and they were all put down later on through different means and measures. And many of the people who did not want to give Northern Ireland up in the treaty in the early 1920s, they would have been of the same more working class, socialist minded types of people as well. So I do not believe that Sinn Féin, for instance, Sinn Féin will be in a dilemma when it comes to what they're going to do about Shannon Airport when they get into power. Because for decades, they spoke about closing it off to the US military. Well, what happened in Pine Gap in Australia in the late 1970s, mid to late 1970s, when the Prime Minister of Australia didn't even want to close Pine Gap, a US base used to create intelligence operations throughout Asia. He just wanted to ask questions in his own parliament in his second term as Prime Minister. He went in to do that morning, but he wasn't Prime Minister by the time he reached that podium. An archaic law had been taken out, an English law had been taken out to dissolve the government and to remove him of his power. So Sinn Féin is going to have to face up to a lot of things in the future. There's a lot of former Sinn Féin supporters who believe they've watered down to the point that they're nothing more than Fianna Fáil light now in the Irish Republic. I don't see any immediate change with what has happened in the north. The economics won't change. Sinn Féin was their minister, Barbara de Bruyn, in their first power sharing agreement after the economic collapse, in 2008. Barbara de Bruyn was one of the first ministers to make cuts. She was Minister for Education, I believe, and she cut public transport for disabled children in rural areas. This was the left-wing Sinn Féin government that down in the south are saying no cuts, no cuts, no cuts. Up in the north are doing it. And I put that personally to Gerry Adams one day, and his reply to me was, "Oh, but up at the north, they get their money from London. They've no choice." And I said, "Gerry, we get our money from Brussels. What choice do we have?" So there was no particular response to that. I don't see any major change. I actually see a gradual collapse, potentially, of the Good Friday Agreement as it becomes more obvious. If Sinn Féin are willing to blow the trumpets of true independence in a united Ireland, I actually see a potential collapse in the Good Friday Agreement when it becomes more and more overt that the Unionists will never and never intended a democratic process in which there could be a possibility of a united Ireland.
Well, that's one thing that's uniform throughout the Celtic countries, is that the British Unionists do not like democracy unless they're winning. As soon as they don't get a vote they like, they're opposed to it. We've seen it in Scotland, you're declaring in Ireland. The one thing I'm surprised about, you're talking about the green line and the red line that they've got for goods. I'm surprised the DUP didn't insist on a blue line and a green line.
An orange line.
Yeah, I'm just surprised in that. But while you're on, because you're also our Ukraine expert, not just our Irish expert, you're also our Ukrainian expert.
I wouldn't say an expert, but let's say
no, you're our expert, because we're no experts on here. And of course, the last time you were on here, we had a show which we called The Forgotten War, and it's still forgotten. But I got some news through that in the last month, it's estimated that up to 30,000 Ukrainians have died in the Donetsk and Lugansk region, which is horrific. I so want to see a ceasefire. Can you give us an update, Finbar, on what you know at the moment, what's going on over there?
Yeah, well, first of all, just in reference to the 30,000 dead, last night I was watching, there's some indications that the Russians are starting to use their TOS-2, which is a multi-missile thermobaric missile launch system that can launch up to 18. I think I've seen one of them that are 24 launch holes, if you want to call it. There'll be like a big cube on wheels with and I just was looking at the damage that these thermobaric missiles do. And one of these thermobaric missiles, it does two things at the one time, it appears. On the one hand, it puts out loads of mini bombs and flames and burns and is considered to be a flamethrower. But on the other hand, the missiles create a vacuum for maybe a few hundred square meters around it. Just one of them. And anything within that range is obliterated. Completely obliterated. So the level of violence with the machinery of war that exists today is horrific. And although I know I get accused of by comments, and I'm sure I will again this week, comments about being a pro-Russian supporter. I'm not pro-Russian, I'm not pro-Ukrainian. I'm pro-peace. But I understand that to obtain peace, as lasting peace, means being honest with people and not actually feeding your own propaganda and your own counterintelligence and bringing that into peace meetings. There has to be a reality here. There has to be a full understanding of the background of this to be able to conceive solutions to this. So I am horrified at the idea of any human being having to face a thermobaric missile, any human being having to face a situation, even if they don't experience the direct violence, of being uprooted with their village, with their town, with their city, of being dispersed and moved on. Totally against it, no matter where it is. But I'm also totally against the arrogance that created this situation in the first place. Where we are this week and the changes over the last week, last week I reported, 2 weeks ago, sorry, I reported that, and it had happened only the night before, that the Russians had put a tunnel system, a 2 kilometer, they found, sorry, a tunnel system, 2 kilometers long in Avdiivka, going underneath the main fortifications of Avdiivka to the southeast of Avdiivka. They accessed that, and at the time I used the phrase city center. Sometimes you're talking off the cuff, you say words, and if you could go back and you were writing it, you would have been more exact. But they got into the city proper is a better way maybe to put it. They're in at the city center now, the reports are. Avdiivka is completely surrounded. The Russians, I believe now, even have fire control over the final road into the city. So it's another Bakhmut. That's what's happening. And they're predicting the final collapse of Avdiivka over the next couple of weeks. It's under when you say a city has fallen, that means, to my mind, that the predominant party that once held the city does not anymore have any of the infrastructure or any of the personnel or the equipment or capacity to hold that city anymore. You still might have patches of fighting. You might have soldiers, 1 or 2 soldiers left, right and center, some snipers, and that's still in the city, and it has to be cleared out. But when the city falls, when we hear that phrase, what it means is the other party has become the dominant party to the extent that there is no hope for the other side. And that's where Avdiivka was even 4 or 5 weeks ago. But that's certainly where it is now. On a political situation in Ukraine at the moment, the Zelensky affair is continuing. We don't know if Zelensky, who is the titular, at least the titular head of the Ukrainian army, there's been rumors flying around now for 4, 5, 6 weeks that he has been fired or he's about to be fired by Zelensky. But it would appear that Zelensky is finding it very difficult to find a replacement for him because it's a poison chalice at this stage. You're being handed a losing team and there's no way of winning this. And there is an expectation that if the shit hits the fan in Ukraine completely, that there could be a civil war within that civil war. There could be a situation where the different factions, like the far-right factions, the Nazi factions that exist over there and that were empowered by the West, that they will start infighting with each other. They'll start fighting with elements within the army. And that's very possible. And an indication that this spat between Zelensky and Zelensky is real, and an indication that those factions are starting to take sides, is an image that Zelensky put out last week with the leader of the right sector in Ukraine. And the right sector is an openly neo-Nazi organization that organized and participated and dominated the Maidan protests in 2013-14 that resulted in the overthrow of the democratically elected government. And these Nazis, and that's what they are, were supported by the West at the time. So Zelensky put out this image, and it was really a message to Zelensky to say, watch yourself. These guys have got my back. Now, you may recall in 2019 plus, maybe 2020, when just after Zelensky got elected, he had got elected on the basis that he wanted to create peace and he wanted to stop Ukraine lobbing missiles into the Lugansk and Donetsk region. This is why he got elected, remember. And so there was a video taken about 6 months after he was elected in a forest where he allegedly was meeting leaders of the Azov battalion, all those Nazi militant groups, asking them, which are funded and armed by us, the West, asking them would they tone down on their attacks on the Lugansk Donetsk region. And they basically told him to piss off, pardon for the language, because that is the kind of language they used in the video. When I saw this video, everyone was saying, yeah, this is proof that Zelensky has no control in that. And I just thought to myself, Zelensky is an actor. And I felt this video was contrived to make it look like, well, I tried. What choice do I have? I tried to control the Nazis. And I think it was very, very contrived in that manner. So that's the relationship with the right sector and the far right. And so Zelensky putting out this image after there was a conflictual a video a few years ago. It's almost like saying, if you're with the right sector, you're with me. And there was a threat that the right sector might take the government if Zelensky is fired. That's what I'm taking from it. That's what other commentators are taking from it. The overall front line itself, Russia is slowly moving forward. We said 2 weeks ago, slowly catchy monkey. That's the way the Russians seem to be moving. But there may be preparations for a bigger assault. Vladimir Putin over the last few days has said that they want to expand the buffer zone between what will be the future Ukraine and Russia. That means moving further in. That means at the moment, they're not really moving in any type of speed at all across Ukraine. They're taking it very slowly. It looks like there could be a preparation for a major advance, possibly in spring, to shut this down altogether. I think at this stage, I don't think Putin expected to. Remember, I think Putin went in with only a few thousand soldiers, the Russians, originally at the beginning of the special military operation. They didn't think that Ukraine would last as long as they've lasted. They thought that to come up with a reasonable agreement is, I think, what Putin's government was expecting. They didn't get that. It's gone on 2.5 years, well, 2 years now. It'll be 2.5 years come this summer. And I think the Russians want to see an end to this. There's other things going on in the world which requires their attention as well. That's me.
I think I speak for all peaceniks like myself. Since February 22, I've been shouting for a ceasefire, and I'll continue to do it. But when I heard this about 30,000, it really broke my heart. 30,000 wasted lives, Lloyd. But we're told, we just said that from Finbar, but we're told by the West, there's no Nazis in Ukraine. They're all good guys. And that, Zelensky would not have moved to get rid of Zelensky. Zelensky wouldn't move without the US's permission to get rid of Zelensky. Oh, I can't even get it out.
You're losing me. We know what you mean. We know what you mean.
He wouldn't make a move without US permission, would he?
No, I think there's no question about it. And as Finbar said, we're dealing with the acting president of Ukraine. He is an actor. Then I don't think he can make any moves without the Americans telling him exactly what he can and he cannot do. But the astonishing thing, Roddy, is, we're the figure 30,000, 30,000 Ukrainians dead. Meanwhile, in Gaza, we're, 30,000 soldiers, 30,000 primarily combatants, whereas in Gaza, it's nearly 30,000 innocent civilians. And, the balance in the world is all wrong at the moment. But it's interesting also, the Ukraine is effectively off the front pages. Are we beginning to see some kind of change? I mean, we thought we might, but the Russians are just carrying on with the same process as they had for a while, which is just to draw the Ukrainians in, kill them, move forward a few hundred meters. It's astonishing. It's astonishing.
Just to make it, just on that point, Lloyd, a lot of the Ukrainian soldiers at this point are forced conscripts, and they don't want to be where they are. There's so many of them trying to run away. There's so many of them trying to get out of the country. So many surrendering now once they get to the front line if they're not shot in the back by their own. So the whole thing from Gaza to Ukraine, the horrors of the world. We talk about a progressive world. We're going backwards.
No. And dare I say, the thread running through both Ukraine and in Gaza, Palestine, is the United States of America. That's just a fact that people don't want to admit it, but they can stop it. I've said this so many times. A phone call from Biden to Tel Aviv and a phone call to Kiev, it ends. It's over. But they're not making that call. Too much money to be made. But talking of people, I'm going to come on first. The Archbishop of Canterbury. His only boss is King Charles. He's the second in command of the Anglican Church. Top guy. Where did he go? Techie, can you stick up the picture of the Archbishop of Canterbury? Welby is his name. After the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, I have come to stand with our Ukrainian sisters and brothers to pray with and for them. How nice. I bet you what, two things. I wonder if he'll be mentioning the Russian Orthodox churches that have been taken over by the Ukrainians and the theft of icons, etc., and the assaults upon Orthodox priests, Finbar. I mean, the Archbishop of Canterbury to get involved. You don't see the Pope or the Dalai Lama going to any side. They shout for peace. They don't go to take one side or the other.
Well, I think the answer is in the name, isn't it? The Anglican Church. To my mind, the Anglican Church was always political, wasn't it? From its very foundation, when you think about it, it wasn't about religion. It was always about what somebody wanted, somebody desired or lusted after. And so that's from the very beginning. There was is an image circulating online today and yesterday of a senior Christian Orthodox pastor or bishop or whatever. I'm not sure what exact words they use. And he's been beaten to a pulp by Ukrainian nationalists, and his face is black and blue. And this is circulating at the moment. I wonder if the Archbishop of Canterbury is going to visit him in his hospital bed and provide him with some succor and some prayers and maybe a little bit of a blessing. And do you know something? I think we've all copped on at this stage that anybody that Western countries hold up as a beacon of light and progress is a stooge. I think we've learned that, from the Nobel Peace Prize to the Eurovision Song Contest to just anything and everything. Anything that we were brought up to respect. We're finding out now it's filthy. Yeah,
politicized. Everything is politicized. But the one thing I was reading in I've got to say it was an extremist in America. There's another person on their travels is the famous journalist, ex-Fox News, Lloyd Tucker Carlson. And he has gone and done an interview with Vladimir Putin, which has, back in America, enraged some. I mean, some people want him stripped of his citizenship. They should not be allowed back into America. He's a commie. And I mean, that kind of sets the mindset of the Americans. They still think of Russia as the Soviet Union. But Techie, could you stick up some of the points that have come out from Tucker Carlson's interview with Vladimir Putin? And there's some of them, I mean, there's not much in there you can disagree with, which of course will immediately make me a pro-Putinist. But when you see that list of things that Putin said in the interview, particularly the one here about our message is Russia is not your enemy. We don't want war. We're ready for peace. Russia has over 80 trillion of natural resources. In other words, you ain't going to starve us out. Do you see anything in there that an ordinary, non-biased person could complain about?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think, slowly but surely, we're beginning to see what Vladimir Putin is actually really like in terms of his politics. And I think certainly when you look through the list of those statements, there's not a lot on most of it that I personally could disagree with. But I think the most important part of it is our message is Russia is not your enemy. We don't want war. We're ready for peace. When the narrative that we've had to listen to from various British military personnel over the past couple of weeks is that we need to prepare the dad's army for the coming war with Russia. It's an absurdity. We need to sit down and talk. It should always be jaw, not war. I mean, it's as simple as that.
Yeah. He's also stating, which I think, again, we all know, we have the same thing. He's talking about the United States, but we have it in the UK as well, Finbar, which is you may change presidents, but you do not change those in real power. The US has now entered into a dark period. It has unaccountable leadership. I can say the same for the United Kingdom. You're the expert in Ireland, but certainly that also applies to the UK, because Rishi Sunak might be the Prime Minister, but there's other forces that are playing the
I think it's
taking terms.
In Ireland, it's also been the case historically. We're being told now that with Sinn Féin potentially leading the next government, that might change. But I don't think it really is going to change. I think America's greatest, the biggest stick that the United States uses against Russia is this idea of liberty crimes, this idea that the Russians want to reduce, they already reduced the liberty of their own people, and they want to reduce our levels of liberty to enslavement almost. This is the kind of language that you hear about them. And one major stick that they've been using is the LGBT, and now the LGBT plus, whatever it's called now, campaign, as in how Russians are against this, okay? They do it all around the world, the Americans and the British and the Europeans. Look how awful you are to your gay community. Now, the response of that has been that Russia has actually tightened its LGBT laws. Not liberated them or loosened them, they've tightened them because they've seen the outcome of some of the crap that's been promoted in both Europe and in the United States, where every second child now is going through, it seems to be a rite of passage now that you actually choose your gender. And it's been presented in our schools everywhere. And so it's not a case that, you know, I grew up gay. When I was, I didn't have the language. Even as a teenager, I didn't have the language of it. But when I realized what it was, I knew that I was probably one in 10 or something like that. And there's no big deal about it. But what's happening now with this trans issue, so because that's been attached to the LGBT rights issue, what's happening is Iran, Russia, all the other countries that were quite conservative are tightening down because they're saying it starts off with giving gay people rights. It ends up with your entire male population having their genitalia mutilated. But that is the way they're seeing this. So none of it is doing us any favors. And when they go and beat the liberty crime stick when it comes to LGBT issues in Russia and other countries, they're actually making the situation worse for gay and lesbian people. And as well as that, it often be pointed to me, look what Iran does to gay people. How can you not be for an attack in Iran? And I would say, do you know something? I would prefer never to have a sexual thought in my head and have no war in Iran than to be completely liberally sexually free and have the world at war. I'd far prefer to join a monastery and never look at it again, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, well, I think we're all the same, and you know, peace. But that's the thing. These extremist things that come out. You and I were discussing this just before we went on air, Lloyd. But everyone that goes to court, and I'm going to bring on David Miller as one of them. But David Miller, who was accused of, you know, the people that are accused of, oh, you're an anti-Semite, you're a Holocaust denier because you say, I don't think the Israeli government are acting properly. You're an anti-Semite. The same as when you question any of the trans stuff. Oh, you're homophobic, you're transphobic. It's just name calling. But as soon as they go to court, courts kick out most of these. Techie, can you stick up the David Miller, who's talking about it with Zion? Now, he was, for those who don't know, Professor David, who's been on this show, and we hope to have him on again very soon. He's been busy, as you can see. He's won his tribunal. He was sacked by Bristol University because he allowed himself to complain about Zionism, not Jews or any religion. He has anti-Zionist, as I do. I've got to say, I've got anti-Zionist feelings and beliefs. And he's won his case, and I expect he's going to get substantial damages, Lloyd. And it's good. And he's saying, and I agree, Zionism has to be defeated. And we have to take it head on. Do you agree?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, this is momentous because the whole drive, this whole operation that Israel's been carrying out since the early 2000s to equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism right across the world as a means of controlling Palestinian support organizations, individuals who are critical of Israel. This has now fallen in the United Kingdom. And the most important thing, I think, for us here in Scotland is I want to see a test case in Scotland. Because of our separate legal system, it would be important for us to be able to clear that matter up finally and irrevocably, because the drive to equate anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism, with anti-Israel attitudes has been a curse across our media, a curse across real debate about the nature of the Israeli state for a long, long time now. This moves us on, and I'm so happy for Professor Miller. It's fantastic, and let's hope our own Mick Napier maybe would be the person to try and get a test case to get the equivalence proven in a Scottish court that it does not actually stand up to scrutiny and examination.
But that may not work, Lloyd. I'll tell you why. I have to read into this more. I only saw this story today, but the language of it reminds me of a case of a university lecturer in England, and she wasn't buying into this whole new gender business that's going on, and so she was let go. She took a case and she won the case, and it was a test case that won it. And she took the case under the 2010 Equal Status Act, which only covers England and Wales. And I've got a feeling he might have taken the same case under the same act. And if so,
no, the Equality Act's throughout the UK. It covers the whole UK.
It covers
are you sure
all
about
of us.
that?
Yeah, absolutely, 100% sure.
The law of equality does, but what's different is until we get a case in a Scottish court where the Scottish judiciary effectively breaks that connection between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. That would be what is important for us, because prosecutions in Scotland on the basis of anti-Semitism can be brought under laws that are not applicable in England and Wales, which is why it would be important for us to have that test case. And also, you brought up the issue of the people who've suffered for having gender critical views, in exactly the same way that the Stonewall law that appears to have driven across the British Isles is being applied and then rejected in our courts. What we desperately need is people to recognise that equivalence, how propaganda and the influence of novel ideas can suddenly take on powers that they simply do not have. Stonewall law is not law. The trans rights activism implications in our public services are not law, they are guidance. And what we need is cases in court that make that very, very plain, that the right to hold, we had an employment tribunal here in Edinburgh, it isn't finished yet, but an employment tribunal in Edinburgh just last week, where a worker in the Rape Crisis Centre here in Edinburgh was fired on the basis of carrying gender critical views. Would not go along with the idea that anyone turning up at the Rape Crisis Centre who wanted single sex care, that they were not allowed to say whether or not there were some of the counsellors were in actual fact males who identified as women. That case is will lead to, there will be ramifications on that, but it shows you how far we've got, that people are being fired on the basis of false law that doesn't exist. As I said, the so-called Stonewall law.
Yeah, and it's been done by the pressure, because our media are bought in, same as our media and our politicians are bought into the anti-Zionism. Is anything you say against Israel, Israel is protected and in a bubble. And I just want so people understand, this is not about the people of the Jewish faith. This is about Zionism. And I want to give you a couple of examples. There's a politician from Israel called Daniela Wise. Now, they don't sort of push this in Western media, but I want you folks to see the kind of things this woman says. Jackie, can you stick up the first of the two videos?
People say to me, why don't you explain to the Jews in the United States what is exactly behind your thinking? I explain. But I'm laughing because the right word for it, you have to brainwash all the time. You have to say, to explain it, to live it, to cope with it. My husband says to me, why do you speak to your children all the time about Zionism, pioneers in Judea and Samaria, settling, and all my family are settlers here? Because this is the only way to continue Zionism. I want to have for the Jewish nation the promised land from the Bible, from the Euphrates to the Nile. And I'm sure it will be.
What about southern Lebanon?
If it is part of it, all of it, even parts of Syria, part of Iraq, part of Iran. It's huge.
You think you have any way of convincing people that that would be a good idea?
I convince many. Many people believe in it. I don't see anything anything extreme in my approach. It's the basic Jewish approach.
Nothing extreme. We'll come back to it, but give us the second one as well, Techie, would you? Which is even
I want
worse.
them out of Gaza, and we'll use different methods. One of them is not to give them any humanitarian aid, so the countries of the world will have pity on them and take them.
So starve the people of Gaza. People take pity on the Palestinians, take them in, and they can colonise. Finbar, what do you make of that?
The milk of human kindness is flowing from our ears and our nose and our mouth. I just think it's a horrific type of a person, but I think it's a type of personality that's pretty common from what I can see over in Israel. When I look at all these TikTok videos coming out by Zionists in Israel, and what she's saying is quite tame compared to what some of them are saying. and they're almost wallowing in a celebration of the extremism of their beliefs and their attitudes. They know exactly what they're saying because it was said about them in the 1930s and prior to that. It was said about them and it was done to them. So they know exactly what they're doing. But there seems to be again, I said it 2 weeks ago, this Nietzschean attitude to things, that there's no good or evil, there's just winners. And I think that's her attitude. That's the attitude of many, if not most of the Zionists. She's a settler. She's gone over and stolen somebody's home, somebody's land, living in somebody else's house from a family that was probably there for centuries. Doesn't give a damn because it's about what she wants. That's why Zionism and that's why Israel attracts so many criminals from all around the world. Criminals, self-centered maniacs, pedophiles that go to Israel because they know they'll be able to live up on the high horse on a high pedestal, whereas in their own country they'd probably be in jail. And to be honest with you, that's where that woman belongs as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, there's a new law coming in Israel. But, before we get to that, you can't deny what happened, the narrative of the government, of the Zionist government, what happened. But can you imagine, one of the things they've said, Lloyd, is that when a Palestinian talks about the river to the sea, oh, you see, that's anti-Semitism, and they're out to get us, and they'll kill us, and that's bad, and it's wrong. She's just said it. From the Euphrates to the Nile, all of Lebanon, that's to be ours, the greater Israel. No one says anything. No one says a tick word in the West. The hypocrisy and double standards is ridiculous.
Yes, it is. But, Roddy, there are certain elements in our media who know very well that these are what she just expressed are the principal values and attitudes of the majority of the population of Israel. That's a fact. And our media know it. But they daren't, because of the influence, they daren't put this woman on television. They don't, it's only because of this horrible and disgusting attempt to genocide in the Gazan part of Palestine at the moment that we're beginning to see these people. I was hearing people saying exactly the same things in 2002, and here we are in 2024, and nothing has really changed, except now people are getting through social media access to the attitudes of the Zionists and the settler movement, particularly, they're like the stormtroopers of years gone by in their attitude. It's a kind of mad mob rule. But we really need to begin to understand that Israel is a militant military state, and that has created a psychology amongst its people that Finbar outlined perfectly. It is that Nietzschean concept that there are only winners and losers, that there's no concept of good and evil. This whole idea that the Israelis, when they talk amongst themselves about the idea that you do not need to speak the truth to anyone who is not of the Hebrew faith. Now, this is something we need to keep reminding people of. A central tenet of the diplomacy and the governmental attitudes of the Israelis are exactly that. We don't need to tell the truth, except to ourselves. And I think we're witnessing that. We're witnessing that with the aerial bombardment, the massacre of 30,000 odd people, because on the one hand, it's about defending ourselves, when they know very well in their own conversations that this is about a deliberate creation of pressure and massacre to drive the Palestinian people from their land, as that Zionist lady just outlined.
Absolutely. Starve them out and take over the land.
But at the same time, we spoke a couple of weeks ago about the bravery, especially of the young and middle-aged men in Gaza, and of course the mothers and the women, but the men who are going through the rubble while missiles are coming down to try to save people who are wounded, but also to try to retrieve the bodies of dead children, and the bravery of them. An image came out yesterday of a man who is naked apart from his underwear, his hands tied behind his back, sitting on a seat. Clearly he's been wounded, possibly tortured. There's a hole in his leg. There's indications that there's been something put through his toes. This Israeli soldier standing back while another, photographing this and videoing it, while another soldier is standing over this man in a highly domineering fashion. This man is probably dead now. But he sat in that chair, tied and naked as he was, with a completely straight upright back, eye to eye with that Israeli soldier. And his defiance was shattering, world shattering in terms of what it represented to me, the Palestinian people and the hopes of the Palestinians, but the defiance that they are not going to be stood on like they're insects. And that's another thing that came out this week, where there's been reference to the Palestinians quite regularly over the last while as insects. We know where that language was used before. When are the UN going to militarily intervene to stop this? If this was any other country, there'd be a military intervention being planned now. Yeah,
but America will stop it every time. America protects Israel at all costs. That's the problem, Finbar. Yeah. They are complicit, which brings me on nicely, Lloyd. Nicaragua, tiny Nicaragua, is going to the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, and it's taking the UK, Holland, and Germany and saying that they are complicit in this genocide. Now, I applaud them, and I agree with them. But tell me, why didn't you think they included the US, who are the biggest perpetrator of this genocide that's been going on for 75 years and ethnic cleansing in Israel? Why not the US as well?
I think we spoke about this before we came on air, Roddy, and I think there's three possibilities here. The first one, which is my favourite, is this is Nicaragua taking its revenge for what was done to it during its war of liberation against the dictatorship. Secondly, that maybe America has said to Nicaragua, you're part of the global South. You have these connections, particularly with South Africa, because of their connections during their two separate liberation wars. Maybe maybe the United States is saying, yes, you can go ahead and put some pressure on these other countries. Or maybe just straightforwardly that Nicaragua hasn't mentioned the US because it's a bit too close and they might get bombed, as Henry Kissinger said. What I think is fantastic about this is the concomitant to this has been the Prime Minister of the Netherlands seeking out language that he can use that will not effectively implicate Israel in war crimes, because he's running in a different direction. The Norwegian defense minister is suggesting also that maybe they need to change the narrative and Israel needs to calm down in case Norway becomes implicated. There have been rumbles from Germany as well that they are somewhat concerned. And indeed, we've had Mr. Cameron saying that there should be a Palestinian state as soon as possible. Excuse me. These are people running for cover. They're running for cover because of what Nicaragua is doing, what South Africa is doing. South Africa announced this morning it has a list of South African nationals that are currently serving with the Israeli occupation forces, and they will be informed that they are going to be charged and tried if and when they return to South Africa. I think we're having that multipolarity muscle flex happening at the moment. It may well be considerably more complicated than certainly I interpret, but it's got to be a good thing when little countries are beginning to exercise their power on the world stage. I think Scotland should be doing as well, but that's for another time.
Yeah, because I'm sure you, Finbar, would like to have seen that the Irish government had taken this action, because the people of Ireland are very much behind the Palestinians. It's just as usual, our government and our media who are on the side of Israel.
The Irish people are unbendingly in support and have absolute empathy with the people of Gaza and the people of Palestine for obvious reasons. We were, the English tried to genocide us on a number of occasions over centuries. We're on your side. And yourselves. And so we're fully aware of it, and it's very raw for us. But as well as that, I think, I don't know, is it a historical Catholic thing? Is it a Celtic thing? But we seem to be able to experience more empathy for others, than certain other nationhoods appear to be able to do. In terms of Nicaragua, I think it's obvious why they didn't name the United States. If you look at even in Belarus, even in Iran, the United States still has strings it can pull to create protests on the street. They still try to destabilize the government with these groups that they fund, and sometimes they even arm. And I'm sure that those structures that the US Secret Service have in place in Nicaragua are still there. They're not using them at the moment. They're not pressing that button because the time may not be right for it. But that threat is always there. So I can understand why Nicaragua didn't specifically name the United States. But there's nothing stopping another country from specifically taking a case with regards to the United States complicity in genocide against the people of Gaza. There's nothing. In terms of the Irish, as I said, the Irish people are 100% behind them. However, the Irish politicians are not. We have Leo Varadkar, 2 weeks ago, the Irish Taoiseach again, 2 weeks ago saying that they wouldn't support the ICJ case because it might be make him uncomfortable because of the Holocaust. You know, that kind of Les Dawson. You know, when you hold the breast and push it up, you go when you don't want to say something out loud. You know, and I think that's so that's the take from the Irish government's point of view. And remember, our career politicians want to go up the ladder when they get kicked out in the next election. So they want to get in up the ladder in Europe or in one of these NATO organizations. So they're certainly not going to shake the cage. However, 2 years ago, with the Russian special military operation into Ukraine, the Russian ambassador was called to the Irish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and he was directed to relieve his diplomatic mission of several members of staff as a kind of a slap across the wrist. The Irish government, in the face of obvious genocide, isn't willing to send one. Even if you don't send the ambassador home, you can tell the ambassador to send one member of staff home to impact our diplomatic mission in some way to show our sincerity. But that's not happening. But if you go on to anything Irish about Twitter, on Twitter or X as they call it now, about Palestine or about Gaza, 99.999% of the commentary up there is fully empathetic with the people of Gaza and understanding what's going on over there. And I think most people were well aware of it beforehand as well. So the Irish people, like I'm sure in Scotland, like I'm sure right across Britain, like I'm sure right across the world, are disgusted, terrified, horrified by what's happening in Gaza, but their governments are not reflecting their feelings in the matter.
No, it's terrible, as I say, that our media and our politicians are captured by the Zionist lobby, the Stonewall lobby. You know, they're tied up in that. But, you know, as I go back to the US has been telling us that, you know, they have to, you know, Israel have the right to defend themselves, and the Russians are bad, and if we don't stop them now, they'll be in Poland and Paris before you can blink. This is the same country that this week is bombing Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, but not Iran. Why not? Because Iran, unlike the three I mentioned, can actually hit back.
Yeah, I think they're afraid. Listen, the reality is that the empire that is the United States is overstretched as it is. They cannot put boots on the ground anywhere at the moment. They just don't seem to have the capacity to do it without having to have a mobilization in their own country. And that looks like crisis time when you have to mobilize in your own country. There have been reports coming out left, right, and center about the United States not being able to recruit troops anymore. Nobody wants to join the US Army anymore. You used to join the US Army, and the only reason most young working class men and women joined it was for healthcare and to have a bit of an income of some sort. But it's not looking like, or education, but it's not looking like that's convincing the young people of the United States anymore from the reports coming out. There were war games conducted in the Pentagon with regards to war with China. All the outcomes of these war games showed that China would kick the US ass. The same with Russian war games when they did these modeling projects. It looked again like Russia was going to win. Or if Russia and China combined, they would kick the US ass. US just are so beyond their capacity. The British government, it's laughable in terms of the statements that they themselves make about their navy. The United States and the UK seems to have a problem with their ships falling apart.
Yeah.
Currently. So, you know, they're very, very limited. They keep on making these commitments of 100 and X billion to Israel for weapons, X billion to Ukraine for weapons. these are commitments to send money to themselves because they are the manufacturers of the weapons, the US, and they don't have the capacity to manufacture them. So these are all promises that are just pie in the sky. These weapons commitments, these security commitments that they make to these countries, they can't manufacture them to meet the demand that they've set in their commitments to wars around the world. So Russia sees this. You were talking about Russian figures of 80 trillion was one of the things on that list from Putin earlier. 80 trillion in natural resources. That's 80 trillion in the Russian mind. 80 trillion in the American mind would get to 2 missiles, a tank, and maybe a bicycle. You know what I mean? Because they're so expensive in production, just everything about them. The Russians they actually in their own country have all the necessary materials.
Yeah.
They have a dedicated workforce. They have an economy that still has enough presidential control that you can, in times of crisis, reshift and reshape the economy to work with that crisis, whether it's a military crisis or elsewhere. The United States doesn't have that. Our neo-capitalist states don't have that. As much as Russia is in no way a communist state, it's very much a capitalist state. The protections that the state brought for itself in terms of its style of economy, its ability to change things around quickly, its presidential control in certain things, these things that benefit when you need to react in a crisis.
Yeah, but it's that
the US doesn't have the capacity. They can talk and they can bluster all they want. If they went into a war with Iran, I think ultimately if it was just them and Iran, they'd win. But it's not just them and Iran. They're afraid of this domino effect, which they are creating.
But this 80 trillion of natural resources is exactly why the Americans want to get Russia and break it up and put in one of their own governments so they can go and grab that 80 trillion. That's what it's all about. But
well, isn't that what they did with China? So when it comes to Tibet, for instance, in China, so since the communist revolution in China and the mid to late 1940s, the Americans have been creating these breakaway independence movements.
Yeah.
Not necessarily based on any rational ethnographic arrangement of areas, but more so with regards to breaking them up so that we can actually take the resources individually to create civil unrest within China so that we can collapse the Chinese government. Tibet was an example of it. The Dalai Lama is the perfect puppet in every way with regards to do that. Remember, Tibet had slavery until the communists took over. It was actually a feudal system in which the monks controlled everything. It was, and everybody else was slaves. And that's what the Dalai Lama over the last 40, 50 decades, 5 decades, that's what they've been wanting to bring back, supported by the CIA. You go down to Hebei province and all around Xinjiang and over in China, where they're talking about the Uyghurs. The CIA and the Americans were again, like they do everywhere where there's a Muslim dominant religion, they tried to foment extremism. And the Chinese had no choice but to come down on their ISIS that was being created by the US in China. And they came down and they arrested the people involved, but in no way was there a genocide against the Uyghur people who are doing really well in China. And in fact, the World Council of Muslims visited that area of China to investigate for themselves and came away very happy and saying that there's clearly no evidence of any genocide of the Uyghur people. And this is again, so with Russia, same thing. Promote these wee breakaway movements. Create civil unrest inside Russia. Collapse Russia. Don't give a damn about what happened the last time they did it in the mid to late 90s. And that's why Putin came to power, because they tried to destroy Russia. They took all of Russia's resources. They handed it over to Western controlled, quite often, oligarchs. And Putin, and then they turned all these major, what were state companies, they turned them into shells. They were selling them off to the lowest bidder in the United States and elsewhere. And Putin stepped in and stopped it. The prostitution had gone through the roof in the cities of Russia with the poverty, the child poverty. Do you remember the videos from late 90s Russia of the masses of children living in the subways and on the streets of Moscow? They're not there anymore. And no. Putin has actually raised the living standard of the Russians, given them self-respect again, and he's loved in Russia. But the Americans want to create division, and they will try to break it up, just as you said, into all these little parts. Maybe this country existed 500 years ago, so what we'll do is we'll get a movement to start making that happen again. And that's the way they do it.
Yeah, but they won't, of course, Lloyd, ever tell us the truth, because that, you know, it's the problem in the world is greed. That's the biggest problem we have. But we're running out of time. Techie, could you stick up the latest UN figures of from Gaza? Lloyd, there it is. The UN reports that approximately 100,000 Palestinians dead, wounded, or missing. And still it goes on. It seems to me, as a layman, that Israel has ignored the warning from the ICJ. Is there any chance you think the ICJ may act before the month is out?
I really don't know, Roddy, but I think what we're seeing is another example of Israel does what Israel wants to do. They don't really care what the result of the case is going to be. They've been given, you know, the interim judgment, which gave them, you know, room to maneuver, an opportunity to maybe just pull back. And what they've done is they've effectively said, well, we don't really care, and are carrying on with the same level of intensity. I mean, yesterday there was a UN relief convoy got fired on by the Israeli Navy, you know, as it's traveling along the coastal road. Now, I'm sorry, to fire a shell, you know, the Israelis said it was a mistake, but to fire a shell at a truck when you're 6 miles out or 4 miles out at sea, you know, it takes a bit of doing, and it doesn't happen by accident. But it's the impunity, it's the sense of impunity that the Israelis appear to have has allowed them to just carry on as, I mean, in real terms, Roddy, in answer to your question, I think they don't give a damn, and I worry about when we finally get the judgment, what can be done. Because if they're ignoring the interim recommendations, then they're going to ignore the final decision. And that's the point where, as you yourself said earlier, when is it going to happen that there'll be a military intervention on behalf of the United Nations? Will there be a military intervention on behalf of the ICJ? Who can tell?
But they don't have an army. That's the problem. That's the problem. The ICJ don't have anything to back it up. But
and it's not just the injury.
I think also, can I just finish with this? You know, in the end, as the settler woman said, they want everybody gone. And the Israelis will use any opportunity to get everybody gone, if that means dropping bombs on them or starving them or allowing them to develop, you know, diseases like typhus and so on that we know are beginning to happen there. Their aim, which is the eradication of the Palestinian people, still carries on, irrespective of the damage. And their mission, you know, the mission and purpose of Israel is self-preservation. And if the central tenet of that self-preservation is they want to kill us, if we don't kill them, a la Bible, then they will come back and get us. The Israelis don't care. They will do, they are carrying out their mission, which is the eradication of the Palestinian people.
Their mission from God. But Netanyahu said a couple of weeks ago he didn't give a damn about the ICJ judgment. He said that publicly a few weeks ago. And if he did give a damn, I'd be worried that that's almost like a judge in a court who's aware that there's a crime happening in a shop and makes an announcement to those thieves in the shop saying, okay, we're going to be in it's 6 o'clock now. We're going to be into at 10 o'clock. We're going to be into at 10 o'clock, so don't be bold. There's going to be nothing left in the shop at 10 o'clock. You know, and that's what they're doing. And they will always, there needs to be the weapons have to be turned off. The supply of everything to Israel. And this is what the Yemenis have been trying to do peacefully with no bloodshed. Well, not fully peacefully, but with no bloodshed. They've been trying to switch off the supplies to Israel to make them see some goddamn sense. Because when you're hungry, that's when you start seeing sense.
Yeah, well, the other thing is maybe some of this action from Nicaragua and maybe some more other countries where the British and the Germans and the Dutch suddenly realise that, wait a minute, they can bring pressure and say to America, no, we're out of this, and isolate, dare we say, America. And America maybe has to then think about it. But it's time watching, you won't be watching here, but UEFA, FIFA, within 24 hours of the Russian tanks rolling into the Ukraine, you kicked Russia out of every sporting event in the world. Let's get the Israelis out of every single sporting event in the world for a start. And as Mick Napier said last week, there's the World Student Games, I think, is in Glasgow soon. Let's make sure we make it that the Israeli athletes know they're not welcome. Anyway,
you know what just as horrible as seeing the blood and the gore. And I saw a video this morning of a wee girl. She must have been 5 or 6, and she clearly had no mother, father, or family with her. And an aid worker was trying to convince her to cross the road to go to a safe zone. And she wouldn't go. She was shaking, crying. Just in fear, if I crossed that road, something's going. No mother, no father, family gone, with a stranger trying to convince her. What did she see the last time they crossed the road that nobody knows about, that's stopping her from crossing the road this time? It's just horrific. The whole thing is just unbelievable.
What we didn't get a chance to talk about, gentlemen, of course, was the jailing of Imran Khan and his wife. And they were jailed, ladies and gentlemen, because the Americans couldn't force them to go against Russia and break ties with Russia. That's why Imran Khan, the Americans are behind that too.
Just to watch that election in Pakistan on Thursday, the Imran Khan's party is still running. He's in jail. Some other people in the party have been murdered and assassinated over the last few weeks. Watch this space. Pakistan is a nuclear power. The Americans are exerting as much power as they can at the moment in Pakistan to ensure that democracy does not happen. Watch that space.
Let's hope that Imran Khan's team win. More on that next week, folks. But till we see you, you and yours, please take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.